Okay. Welcome to this episode of Thanatology Themes. I'm Carolyn, your host, therapist, and thanatologist. I'm thrilled today. We have a wonderful speaker, PhD, doctor. I'm going to be reading from my notes. We're going to go with the flow here. Dr. Liza Barros-Lane, and I'm going to do a little bio here. So first I'll read your bio, and then I do want to mention ADEC. I'm always like, ADEC,
Mhm.
okay. I always show our handbook of thanatology here, my Bible, if you will. So let's introduce you. Okay. Dr. Liza Barros-Lane is an assistant professor of social work. I'm a social worker at the at the University of Houston downtown, and the founder of the Young Widowhood Project. Her interest in young widowhood research began after the tragic death of her husband, Brent Lane, when she was 36, leaving her with a 3-year-old son. Finding little research on the topic, she dedicated her career to studying and raising awareness about the hidden experiences of young widows. Liza conducted a systematic review of young widowhood challenges worldwide and has since explored themes like disenfranchisement, which we talk about, inadequate support, also an important theme, empathetic failures, and the impact on sexual identity and desire. Her research is published in scientific journals such as Omega, Journal of Death and Dying, the Journal of Loss and Trauma, and Death Studies. Okay. Um, and I was at the ADEC conference earlier this year in Houston,
Mhm. Yep.
your hometown.
My hometown. Yep.
Yeah. And I know that now you did a poster board presentation, right?
Yes, on sexuality
Okay.
and a presentation on the systematic review of challenges around the world. Yeah.
Okay.
hmm
Okay. So I'm going to introduce your paper, Young Widowhood, a qualitative study of sexuality after partner loss. And you're main author? How do we,
And the first author.
the
Yeah.
first author? Okay.
Yeah. hmm
And I
hmm
would like to name the other authors, which is important to say. Fei Yang, is that?
Okay. Young. Yeah.
Faye Young, Sarah
hmm
Volman, Austin L. Allen,
hmm
Elizabeth Gilmore, Kelly Ellis, Lucas Sanchez, Kevin Buckler.
hmm Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So let's start with, you know, you have a PhD, you're doing a lot of
Mhm.
great work, but this topic is personal to
Yeah.
you.
hmm
So I think it's important to start with that. Can you share your experience as a young widow?
Yeah, so in 2020, my husband, who was a psychologist that focused on grief, by the way, Brent,
Oh,
he was, kind of experiencing difficulty with the lockdown and being disconnected from people. And even though he was an introvert, he still really liked having the face-to-face connection. And so he
mhm.
decided to buy a boat, and he was very experienced as a boater, but he hadn't had a boat in a couple years. And it was a small John boat. And he bought the boat, and on the first day he went to try it out. 2 hours later, the police were at my house letting me know that he had gone missing. And so just that's where the nightmare started for me. And his body was found 2 days later. He had drowned. And it was just a very obviously traumatic, I mean, horrible experience that you live in day by day because that person continues to be dead and they continue to have died the way they died, and all the things, all the changes that come about. And so I immediately begin to look for, and there's an abridged version, of course, of what all happened, but I started looking for research on like what can help me understand what's going to happen to me. How am I going to survive this? And I very quickly realized there wasn't a ton that I could read and see myself in it. Of course, there is a lot of literature on bereavement and those kinds of things, and some of them tend to be more technical, like as they should be. And but I wanted to read like, what does it sound like to be like me, like qualitative research. And so there's so many aspects of widowhood that are hidden, that are unknown. And I thought, you know what, like this is one way that I can kind of go into the research and and feel like Brent's death was not in vain. Not that I could have undone his death, right? But that he is dead, and so what can I do to feel like I made this world better as a direct result of his death, and to feel like he continues to support people in their bereavement even after he's gone. And that makes me feel emotional because I feel like we continue to be a team in a way, as I do this research. But the personal aspect of this particular study of sexuality, was, when Brent first died, I was in shambles. I mean, I cannot explain, like, hardly being able to shower, hardly being able to get out of bed, like just in shambles. I got PTSD, and just there was not much that could really help me feel better. And I started finding all these support groups, these online widows support groups. And I found people would talk about sexuality in kind of hushed tones, but as I got introduced to more and more groups, and I started getting into more the the more open and the humor groups, and like humor, anything goes, things like that, those kinds of groups, people were very open about talking about their sexuality, like how long it's been since they have had sex and how sad they were, and even a lot of like funny, sexual jokes. And this was very early on in my experience where I had already realized this is a big deal. Like, Brent knew me, he knew my body, he understood me, he saw me going from not having a child to having a child, and the way your body changes. And he loved me and accepted me for who I was. And we had a great relationship sexually and in all the other ways too. I mean, normal like all other human beings, but we were very close. And and so I started seeing people write about that, and I realized that's the only thing that makes me laugh, is those dirty sex jokes, and the dirty dark humor also. Any kind of gallows humor, that was also funny to me. And so I remember when I first found those groups, I stayed up all night one time just laughing and laughing and laughing. And I was like, oh my God, I feel so much relief right now from the pain and the fear and all the things. But it wasn't something I resonated with immediately. I resonated with I resonated with, like, I lost my sexual partner, am I ever gonna have sex again? That, but not really feeling like I care. But then at some point I began to experience what we'll talk about here in this paper, which is the widow's fire, which is that intense desire for sex. And the way it showed up for me, I love that we could make fun of it because it is kind of funny, but really all that like humor is a way to help deal with the stress and the pain of having those desires, because it's I don't know how to explain it, but it is the strangest thing to really desire and want to have sex with someone who's dead. It's like it boggles the mind. And so every time that I would have a desire to have sex, with Brent, it brought so much grief and so much yearning for me. And I think that that is what I was like, I wish people understood how painful this was, and the ways that we all do different things to manage it. Some people are like, I can't engage in sexuality or in sexual, behavior with anyone else because it hurts too much. Other people are like immediately started what they called widowing, which is just like having sex with person after person after person.
I never heard that term before.
Yes, it is. It is a very common term in the widows groups,
Okay.
not as common out here. It's a very private world, I think. It's a very
Yeah,
private
yeah.
world. Yeah.
Well, I want to just go back for a second because so when I train my therapist, one of the things we talk about when we do our grief assessment is it's important to work with everybody individually. And one
Mhm.
of those pieces is what was the age of the person who died and what is the age of the griever, the person we're working with. And I think
Mhm.
this is very key.
Yeah.
And I just want to kind of step in because I would imagine there's a lot of widows groups for older, I don't know, over 70 even probably.
Mhm. Mhm.
The older group, even under, even in the 60-year-olds,
Mhm.
there's even less probably, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, anything you want to?
Yeah, so I think the age definitely, we're at the sexual prime in our 30s, so 20s, 30s. I mean, you have widows who are 17, 18, 19, and so on. And people continue to, yes, people experience their sexuality much differently than they do in the older ages. But I do want to say that, as you said, it is an individual experience for each person. There are people who are in their 30s and their 20s who their dysregulation comes in, and their sexual dysregulation is like, I have zero sex drive, and there's a lot of grief about having zero sex drive. And I've had women um private message me who are in their 60s and 70s saying, I still feel this way, even if I'm not a younger widow. So it really is an individual experience. I would say it's more concentrated in the younger group, but it is not like, like you said, if you treat everyone individually, understand that that might be a thing, that's the best way, I think, to approach as a therapist.
Mhm. And I'm always revising our assessment, and this is an important piece to add to our assessment, right? Um,
Yeah.
for clinicians,
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I have some points I was just going to add. I'm looking at my
Yeah.
paper.
Mhm.
So I feel, maybe I'm wrong, that this is a topic rarely discussed. I mean, I've been in the end of life space for 15 years. I feel like this is, did you find that? I mean, maybe it's changing now, but I feel like, I don't know, it's still taboo, right?
It is still taboo. Absolutely. Yeah, I found the reason why I decided to write about it is because I was shocked
Mhm.
that the word even widow's fire was not yet introduced into the literature, because it is so used in the widows groups. I did not create that word. That was a word that they all like, oh, that's widow's fire. They would describe it. And so when I decided to develop this study along with a team of colleagues who collaborated with me, we spent the whole summer just going through the literature with a fine-tooth comb, looking for what is there on sexuality and widowhood. And there was not much. There's not
Mhm.
much at all. So it's taboo, I think, because it's at the intersection of sex is taboo for women, right? Like
Yeah.
there are all these like societal expectations, but bereavement norms also. So this
Mhm.
idea of like, can you feel all this sexual desire when you are grieving?
Mhm.
That feels really wrong and very
Yeah.
taboo. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you just mentioned two things because it's certainly, I think clinicians don't talk about it. And then I hear what you're saying. There's this judgment piece or other piece that widows are probably like, oh my God, I shouldn't be feeling this, or I can't, or that other piece, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's, there's so much about widowhood, including sexuality, but that you feel that you're being transformed into something you don't recognize anymore. It's like one day you woke up and you start growing claws and you got like hair coming out. You start to become a beast. That's how I feel that we feel. It's like, what is happening to me, both like in all my mental health difficulties, my sexuality this is not, my husband wouldn't have recognized me like this anymore, And so you feel stunned and lost. And it really helps for someone to to name it for
Mhm.
you. You know what I mean? And not just that. Here's the other piece of it, is that every time, like I've seen this in the literature on yearning, when widows who really depend on their husbands, like they have to start learning the tasks their husband used to do. It's like this daily constant reminder of the practical things that reminds them this person's dead, and it takes them to the yearning. That sexual piece, if you're in a monogamous relationship, that's the only person you get to have sex with, right? And so there are these constant reminders that this person is now dead, but not only are they dead, that you're now isolated and alone and potentially unlovable in this new state of your body. You know what I mean? And so I feel like
Mhm.
it brings up a lot of existential pain and questions just in the sexuality alone, not to mention all the other places where all these, like, we run into the reality that they're dead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is so great. There's so many things for us to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, so I had wanted to go into, you had mentioned, maybe we just talked about this, the study examined, the sexual bereavement of young, you were the first to report it. Your work is the first to really write about this in the literature?
Qualitatively. Yeah,
Qualitatively.
qualitatively.
Okay.
We were asking people, what is it like for you to have lost your sexual partner? Yes.
Okay, okay.
Hmm.
Um, so you had mentioned three themes.
Hmm.
Let's define Widow's Fire. Let's start with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So Widow's Fire, that was a second theme.
Okay.
And what we found with some of the widows, what that was, that this is an involuntary, and I'm saying the exact words here, and
Mhm.
often distressing sexual desire that's marked by intense cravings, obsessive thoughts, and longing for connection. And it is one of those it is one of those things that make people want to, and skin hunger. That's part of it too, is
Right,
skin hunger. And
right.
so it's like the desire to have physical sexual connection with someone and intimacy is what I would say widow's fire. And it is not just wanting to have an orgasm. It is really wanting to have intimacy. To me, at the heart of it is like an obsessive desire for sexual intimacy with somebody.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And I know yearning is definitely in a lot of the phases of grief and models we use, and it feels like it's maybe connected to that yearning and searching piece.
I think so. I think so. This paper has not yet been finished, but that we're asking women, why do you think that was there? And they have several reasons, but the one that really pertains to what you're saying here on yearning is that we're looking for what was lost. We're looking for the intimacy and the physical connection. And so it's not wanted. Nobody conjures this up and says, I really want to feel this way, because that yearning makes it hurt more. We don't want to yearn. We don't want to feel that sadness, but it just comes up and it becomes like this almost driving instinctual force in people's lives that feels very disruptive.
Mm. And I thought this was interesting. One of the I know in the definition, part of it said widows fire complicated their struggle to understand and accept post-loss identity as sexual beings. And I
Yeah.
just want to talk about that for a second because I use the grief model, the 3 R's. I
Mhm.
use it with clients all the time,
Uh-huh.
retelling the death story, reinventing, rebuilding your life and reinventing who you are. And I introduced this idea and I was like, oh my gosh, sexually, you also have to rebuild and reinvent. So I thought that was so interesting and I had never thought of that. Anything you can add to that?
Yeah, no, it's so central. Like I don't think I realized before this how central sexuality was. I mean, of course, if you look at the sexuality literature, it's there. I mean, of course, that's why they focus on it, but I'm not a sexuality researcher,
Mhm.
So I just got into that literature to see it, and it is core to who we are, and there are a lot of sexual changes. So if you have a person who used to not be very sexual and now they can't do anything but think about sex, that is a shocking difference. It's like, how do I even manage? Who am I? And so there's a lot of judgment, inner criticism, and then also a lot of grief and pain that comes with that part of the change, and then the ways that our bodies have changed since before we got married to or partnered to after we got partnered. So even the body changes are part of that sexual identity. It's like, am I desirable? That was one thing that was very important here in the widow's fire, and I don't think that I had this written in the definition. This intense need to be desirable. And so when you are older, you're coming
Mhm.
into this, by the time you're ready to date, you're like, am I still desirable? Am I still? And for people in their day-to-day lives, that may not be something that's important. It becomes critical. It becomes
Mm.
critical to try to
Mhm.
figure that out because of how widow's fire can cause such intensity in people. It's just like, how do I manage this? So people, even if they're not ready to have sex again, they start to wonder, when I am ready to have sex, will anyone even want me?
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I just thought that really reminded me of the like we're rebuilding our life, right? And then who am
Yeah.
I? How am I rebuilding if I'm not desirable?
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Um so the first this stuck out to me. There was a I wrote, it's important to name the transitions in a woman's sexual trajectory could include. I don't know why I thought that was important. I guess I wrote major life changes.
Yeah.
I guess we kind of
Yeah.
touched on that.
Hmm.
Yeah, did you want to add anything to that?
No, just I think I said motherhood several times.
Right.
Becoming a mother changes your body. Menopause
Yeah.
changes the body. Puberty changes the body.
Yeah.
All of these are considered like these turning points in people's sexual trajectories. And so, death of a partner, depending on when it happens, intersects with some of these, trajectories that are already there. But like developmentally, you're not supposed to really lose your partner before menopause, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you get to a point where you
Yeah.
have this
Yeah.
this change. So I think that that the death is a turning point for people, that the death of a
Mhm.
partner is a sexual turning point as well. That is, it came at a certain time. And what that means with turning points, like, transitions are the things that are like expected, motherhood,
Mhm.
menopause, that
Yeah.
those are, but turning points are like your life completely flipped on it. You were not expecting this. So it could be that you were a sexually active person and after widowhood, you no longer are. That is a turning point, so that's something really that brings up a lot of grief for people if they, especially that was unwanted, if they want to continue to have a fulfilling sexual life, but now you're doing this right before menopause, your body has changed a lot, or after motherhood. That's a very like painful combination.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, I'm gonna jump ahead here.
Hmm.
Um, can we jump to something you had written about? And this goes back to, I think, widowhood and how widows are uh, viewed. I wrote there was violation of human rights. There were some things I wanted to read, but I'm not sure if you kind of want to introduce anything about. It sounds to me like there's expectations, what a widow, what they're supposed to be. I mean, this goes back to this idea of like redefining yourself. It sounds like society and culture has a lot to say about that, right?
Yes, they do. There's a lot of um, yes, expectations that around the world, and we think, the United States is a developed country or whatever, we're doing better, but there's a tremendous amount of judgment about how you should show your grief, especially around sexuality.
Yeah,
And what I mean by the violations of human rights is that if you look at the articles of human rights, they really protect people's autonomy and freedom. So there are things that we might look at and say, that's not really a violation. That's really, it's just someone's butting into your life. But, one of the violations of human rights is intrusions.
mhm,
Like people have the right to live free of intrusiveness.
yeah,
So this is why in the United States, it is still a human rights violation to have people, watching you. Where are you? Who are you with? Are you
yeah,
dating someone you shouldn't be
yeah,
dating? And being even put on blast on Facebook or on Instagram by family members when they find out that the widow is, repartnering or dating. It's stuff like
yeah,
that. But then you have this spectrum, right? That I will not
mhm,
pretend that what we experience here is at the same level of violence as people experience in other parts of the world. And so in what you see here with sexuality and oppression of sexuality is that you have either oppression or exploitation of people's sexuality, of women's sexuality. So either you're not allowed to remarry, you're not allowed to repartner, and we're gonna make it very hard for you and costly for you to do it, or we're going to exploit you sexually. So you are more open to people coming and trying to do things that are inappropriate. Happens in the United States, but in other countries, men will just show up to women's homes, and I've seen this in the research, and they just rape them, and because the husband's not there and they can't defend themselves against, the new person. And in other countries, it is like in sub-Saharan Africa, they have this practice of widow cleansing where they have to cleanse women and not men. Women are are left with evil spirits when the husbands die. And so the only way to get rid of the evil spirits and the curse that comes with all of that is to ritually rape them, either the brother-in-law or the cousin on the paternal side, I mean, on the husband's side, or they hire a cleanser to put them through these rituals. And it is women have to submit to this, or else they don't have access to their children anymore, or they're not allowed to be back in society because you're walking around with curses, and anything bad that happens is now blamed on you. So it is like I have been shocked by the amount of oppression and exploitation of women's sexuality. And I've never been, because that was not my area, like women's rights on sexuality. I mean, of course I support it, but that was not central to me
mhm, mhm.
as a researcher. But I've just been like, why is there such a threat with women's sexuality? It's just insane to me.
Wow. No, these are, yeah, very upsetting, very disturbing. And I know you had written, uh, I'm just, oh yes. So I think it was in Nigeria,
Yeah.
forcing women to sleep with their partner's dead corpse as a symbolic act.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah. So not, not to engage sexually, but to sleep with the
oh,
body.
sleep with, okay.
Sleep with the body,
Okay.
yeah. So
Okay.
but for some people it was 3 or 4 days, and the body changes and it's terrifying. So it's the to me it's about like, what was your purpose of doing
Right.
this? This is
Right.
to say that you
Right.
really miss him, that sexually we're going to pretend that it is a sexual symbolic last act. It's just, I don't, this shouldn't happen to anyone, but it's very, very much a gendered thing that happens to women, not to
Mhm.
men.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say before we move on for this, I remember reading an article in National Geographic some time ago, and there
Mhm.
was a social worker in India who somehow got some money and she opened a home for
Mhm.
widows because I think in that, at least that part of India, widows were very what's the like thrown away. I don't know what the word, but
Mistreated, yeah,
mistreated or
abused,
like
yeah,
yeah or kind of like shunned, kicked out, and so she took
yeah.
them all in and they all lived together, and it was actually very celebratory. They had each other and
Mm,
she had this
yeah.
home for them. And anyway, I just thought that was
Oh, that's beautiful.
yeah, it was kind of an
Yeah.
uplifting
Hmm.
story, because I mean the other piece of it where the women had no right to the finances, to the home, to those, the finances of the home, everything went to I don't know if it was like the son or, whatever. It didn't go to the widow, right? So they had nothing. They had anyway,
Yeah. And to the husband's family,
the husband's
because a
family.
lot of time that is in
Yeah.
India, I mean, around the world, women are blamed for the husband's death, but that one of the reasons that is so the family can have a reason to kick them off the
Mhm.
family land. So
Yeah. So anyway, a positive social worker did a,
yeah,
you
I
know,
love that.
so let's go back. We're kind of, yeah. So, I mean, I think it's important to talk about all of this.
Mhm.
You know, so we're going to go back to, I had highlighted the importance of intimately honest and vividly descriptive. Well, this goes back to your criteria for your paper and when you were working with the groups, right?
Yeah, yeah. So who was it that I invited to the groups? Were women who were 45 and under when they
Hmm.
were widowed, that had been
Yeah.
widowed the last 3 years.
Mhm.
And what was it? And you had asked me about the what I had asked them, right? The questions
Mhm.
that I had included. So what I wanted to know is what was it like to lose a sexual partner? And so I asked them these questions in an interview. Can you describe what your sexual relationship was like with your partner before you were widowed? What was it like to lose your sexual partner? What change, if any, was there in your sexual behavior after you were widowed? And what change, if any, was there in your sexual desire after you were widowed? And the reason I wanted to know what happened ahead of time was because I wanted to know, is this someone that already experiences very high sex drive that they would describe themselves as, you know, the sexuality causing real problems in their lives in the past, or is this new?
Mhm.
And so, it was these were very intimate conversations. I did all the interviews except for one
Mhm.
myself. And I think it was really helpful to be a fellow widow coming in as a researcher to say, I want to understand this. More people don't know this about us. What would you want them to know? And the what would you want them to know piece, I asked that in the interview, but I asked it before I did even the interview guide. I always go back to the participants or first and say, here's what I'm thinking about asking. What should I ask? What do you want people to know about you? So this was very informed by participants ahead of time. And
Mhm.
then we did the interview. And then again, really kept them as um, real peers to us in the research process. And that's what the co-researcher, when we talk about
Yes.
co-researchers, is
Yeah.
that peer. Like there are peers. Like we have the expertise of research and looking at data systematically, and they have the expertise of the lived, reality that we're trying to understand. So it's a real partnership. And so people, I mean, I've never cried so much in interviews, and I've done plenty of difficult interviews in the past with my mentor, Dr. Jody Berger Cardoso. She does a lot of work with undocumented immigrant youth who are separated from their parents. So there's a lot of grief there and a lot of trauma and a lot of like that coming to the United States, and the things that they see are traumatic. And when I used to do the interviews with her there, I would just go back to the car and cry. You know what I mean? Like I could hold it together. But
Yeah.
I think me being a widow and then just what they were saying was very emotional. I also laughed a lot with them, and they were very honest, and I appreciate them so much for their honesty. And so sometimes they would swear, on
Mhm.
in the interview, which I do not care. I have
Mhm.
zero problems with. They call it F-bomb. That is not even a bomb to me. It's just a word that's just discharging really strong emotion. But when we submitted it to the reviewers, they were like, you forgot to take the F words out. And so I had to go back to the literature. And first of all, I don't believe in censoring people's words. Like that's
Yeah.
why I am a qualitative researcher. I say
Mhm.
what you said. I put it in there. But kind of as a compromise, we kind of put asterisks in between so that like the F word had, F and then dot 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 CK, or a K
Yeah.
at the end, so that people would understand the intensity of the emotions that
Yeah.
people are using. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was so important. And from one of my mentors, I learned that um sometimes the therapist can use the F bomb. And I work with a lot of younger grievers. And one said, "I'm so glad my therapist said the F word."
Yes,
But
no, yeah.
yeah, I think it makes you feel more real, and that they're being
Yeah.
heard, right?
Yes, and the intensity, because it really annoys me, even, when people have been like, well, I guess that's a really uncomfortable feeling. I'm like, it's uncomfortable. Like, it does not match the intensity of what I'm saying. It's not uncomfortable. It's painful,
Yeah.
effing painful. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Agonizing. And so
Yeah.
when a therapist is able to really capture that,
Yeah.
and that's what some of the research with the F words or even other words, they say that with people with Alzheimer's and dementia, even if they forget other words, they can still release a volley of curse words because that's coming from a different part of the brain.
Mhm.
I'm not a neurologist, but I'm saying what
Yeah.
they said in that study, and I'm like, that makes sense because it comes from a very emotionally laden place, and so I think it has a real place in therapy.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And you had also said, right, so intimately honest and vividly descriptive of their experiences of sexual longing, which just seems really important, right? You're really
Yeah.
capturing what's happening.
hmm
Yeah. Um, I think we had, theme one. I think if we already talked about this, it's okay. Young widows described that even if they initially had no desire for sex, they recognized the profound loss of intimacy and comfort that their sexual relationship symbolized and experienced deep physical loneliness. Maybe we already,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah,
kind of touched a little bit on it, but one thing that
yeah,
I did want to say was that just
yeah.
on a personal level, when Brent died, this is during COVID, so there was not a lot of being able to be around
Mhm.
people, even though people did come around me, and I am so grateful for that. But I felt like I was losing my mind without any physical touch at night, And so sometimes I would just hug my own face, just hold myself to feel like I was
Yeah.
being held by somebody. And my mom would come and give me a little back rub for the first couple of weeks, but that extends into months and into years of physical loneliness. And it doesn't, like even though what they wanted us to understand here is that even though we do not want to have sex, we're not wanting to have sex, we recognize that we lost something very big, that
Mhm.
sex symbolized so much more than just the orgasm. It symbolizes being accepted and loved and held, especially if you have a good relationship. So that would be the only thing I would add to that.
Yeah, I think also it's certainly sex is important and intimacy is it's a little bit different, right? It's just this
Yeah.
other piece. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
I just wanted to add, William Worden is the grandfather of grief therapy. And so he has his own 4 stages, and his second stage is Schmerz. Well, he borrowed it from this German word. It's a
Uh-huh.
German, Schmerz is a German word, and it's the physical pain of grief. And I like in all my work, I add somatics in, and we do a lot of physical work with it. And this is all physical, I mean, not all, but I
Yeah.
think so I just thought it was important to say the word schmers, this physical grief part. And if you wanted to
Yeah.
add something to that, yeah.
I think you said it perfectly. I didn't know that word schmers. I was
Mhm.
hoping that you would define that for me as I saw it in your notes, but no, absolutely. It is physically painful.
Mhm.
And I mean, people feel like they're losing their minds. I don't know how to explain it because you're in this void of you used to have this every night, or however often these people came together and not sex. I'm talking about like just sleeping
Yeah,
together and cuddling, that
yeah.
kind of stuff. And to not have that, it just, oh, the physical pain always pushes those existential feelings of being isolated and alone in the world now.
Yeah.
hmm
One of the things that I also add and with therapy, and I don't know if in grief we talk about it enough, if grief therapists talk about it enough, is that part of it is the physical presence of the person is gone, right?
Yes.
So we talk about
Oh,
grief and feeling sad, and there's a lot but I will sometimes even say it slowly, the physical presence is gone. Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
so, I mean,
Mm.
it makes me emotional.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I still miss him so much.
Mm.
And in that
Yeah.
physical presence, I don't think people can understand the pain of of that particular piece being missing, because it's like the not being alone in the world, what that means. You know what I mean? It's like, I think these symbols are, these experience, these embodied experiences of loving someone else and being with them in the day to day. And then all of a sudden that just being torn from you. And it's constant, this constant reminder of every time you do something, they're not there, and the pain of that physical absence. And so when people say you can develop this new relationship with them that's spiritual and all that, I mean, some of the widows have said, not in this paper, in the next paper, they're like, well, that's good. I'm glad my husband's spiritually there for me, but that's not someone who can, lay with me. That's not someone who can brush their teeth with me. That's not someone that is just I don't have the words to describe how excruciatingly painful that is,
Mhm.
and how that is one of the things that continues to be hard through the years. For me, I'm now almost 4 years out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so you had mentioned skin hunger.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go to theme two. I had
Okay.
written, uh, and there were a couple quotes I had written, regardless of oh, you had said this, regardless of the quality of their previous relationship or
Mm-hmm.
levels of sexual desire, most young widows reported the occurrence. You talked about this intense
Mm-hmm.
desire for sex. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and some quotes I just pulled out. I would have looked for somebody just to cuddle with,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then you wrote the sex drive, unwelcome, shame, sex drive and overdrive,
Mm-hmm.
loneliness if loneliness smoked crack,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought
Mm-hmm.
was like poetic and descriptive.
Yes, I thought so too. She was amazing. I remember that was, I think, participant 21. Yeah, the way she described how deeply lonely, or it could be participant 5, I'm trying to remember who, but it's just like this loneliness on overdrive that is so physically painful. It's that physical presence that you're talking about. It is, it's like, oh, it's like we'll think, oh, I'm feeling lonely today, but this is like I'm losing my mind because I feel so lonely right now. Like it's driving me insane. The loneliness that people feel. It's painful. It's just so painful physically to not have that connection with another person. Yeah.
And skin hunger is a word I had never heard until COVID. I
Hmm.
don't know if I don't know if it's a new term or if it just, and again, for me, it was, I've been doing this work a long time, but I don't know if this is new from COVID. I don't know if you have any weigh-ins about the term skin
I
hunger.
don't know. I don't. I used the skin hunger came from the widows.
Okay.
And it's this, like, what they were trying to show is the physical loneliness. It's that just having orgasms, like, masturbating, and like they said, there's that quote, you can buy all the battery operated boyfriends or girlfriends you can
Yeah.
afford. It doesn't, it's not about that. It's about the intimacy of a physical presence of another person seeing you in that state and accepting you in that state and wanting to be with you in that state. And so I think definitely there is a huge emotional component to it, of course. But I think that when that is embodied physically, that's that skin hunger piece of, like, there was one woman who said, I want that weight on top of me. I want to see him looking into my eyes, and you know what I mean? And whispering those
Oh.
sweet nothings into my ears. I'm not sure that it's in this paper, but I definitely in the next paper if it's not here. And it is about that wanting, it's the embodied love, that's present in good marriages and good partnerships, and it's not, you can maintain this memory of how they used to love you. You can maintain the memory of how you turned them on and how sex was great with them, but you need to continuously experience this in an embodied way, and I think that's what skin hunger really speaks to.
Yeah, yeah, embodied is a great term. Yeah,
Yeah.
very descriptive. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm going to throw out a couple. I know someone had said on the prowl, and someone
Mhm.
actually, I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to say this. One of the people said, participant said, every dick was an opportunity.
Yes. I loved that interview. She was so great. Yeah, well, it just what it does, what Widow's Fire does to people is that, you can walk around in the world, when you're not with widows, when you don't have Widow's Fire, just, paying attention to like, oh, there's that, oh, there's this. When it is Widow's Fire, it's like that is all I can think about. Right. And so this woman was saying that she used to have sex twice a month with her husband. And in the last year of their marriage, he was sick. So they actually didn't have sex for like a year before he died. Didn't care. She was so stressed out taking care of him, worried about what was going to happen.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, one day she wakes up and realizes, I can only eat, I can only uh, sleep, I can only work, and I can only think about sex. That's all I can do. And so all of a sudden, it's like the antenna go up, and you're looking for, like, for her, she's looking for who can I get to help me with this situation? And so that's why she felt like she was on the prowl. She said, she talked about like in the Midwest, in the fairs, all the teenage boys are out there looking for girls. She was like, I was out there looking for every dick that didn't have a wedding band, So she just wanted anything. And so that really shows some of that, I don't know, like obsessiveness that people don't understand. And they have to figure out, what do I do with this? Is that reinventing myself? Like, what do I do with this new reality that now I am just constantly thinking about sex? And just, I just want to be clear too that that Widow's Fire comes and goes for people. It doesn't stay. So I can write about and talk about Widow's Fire now because it's not actively a state I'm in the moment. It's something that, it was very much for 2 months. I experienced it. And then it went away, and then there's been periods of like zero sex drive, and then there's periods of like spurts in between of Widow's Fire, but nothing like it was in those first 2 months. And people talk about it in that way, like it comes and goes. Some people are like, well, I've been like that for 9 years. It just depends. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I did want to make sure we talked about, I'm going to read something. I know I had already told you it made me very teary-eyed, but I'm going to read it.
Yes.
Okay. One widow reported that she avoided masturbating due to the inevitable grief that would follow. Even on occasions, I would go to get myself off. If I did it quickly, I would start to cry because then I was like, he's the one who's supposed to be doing this. And another said when she engaged in self-pleasure, it was so sad. She
Yeah.
would bawl her eyes out and not even think about him. This makes me so sad. And I do this work for a living. I've been doing this for years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. That really is sad. I'm not being
It's
articulate.
poignant.
It,
No, it's heartbreaking. Like
it's
I
heartbreaking.
cry too when I read
Um,
that, and when I talk to them, I would cry with them and I would cry afterwards, particularly those kinds of quotes, because I think you're seeing people left in this juxtaposition of sexual need and desire, and this Widow's Fire being a direct reaction to the death, right? So you're left screwed. You don't no longer have a sexual partner. Now you're left with
yeah.
this intense desire
Yeah.
and trying to figure out what to do with it. And if masturbation is one of those choices that people utilize, it brings so much pain. So you're like, it's this catch 22, you're just damned if you do, damned if you don't. That really, it's very poignant to me. Also, it hurts a lot to think about it. It hurts a lot to think about it in my own experience of like, you know feeling like those reminders would make me want to scream and cry, and many other widows who were not part of the study have told me. I mean, even one widow in her, I think, mid 50s, she called me and she was like, the first time that I masturbated, I started screaming and crying, after I was done, after she had a climax. So it's a very painful experience. It's very obviously intimate, but I think it's probably more common than we might imagine.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's something really, in French, and I don't know how to say it, but I know there's a term that orgasm is a little death,
Yes. Yeah, I've heard of
yeah, I'm not even going to say it, but
that.
but there's just really something, I mean, I agree with you, it's poignant, but I also think there's something primal about it, or
Yeah.
very, human isn't even the word, but it's like, orgasm, death, missing it's very, very primal. That's the word that's coming
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, it's like it's a need, right? And so
yeah,
people have to jump over the hurdle of the pain they know they're going to feel when they masturbate because they need to
yeah,
masturbate. And I think what for me what stands out to me as the primal nature of it
yeah,
is that you could also say I'm just not going to do it, but what you can see here is that you can't just cut yourself off sexually either. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? So then it's like
yeah.
you have to. So then it's like, well, I'm going to do it very quickly so I can get
Mhm.
over the pain of it. For not you, not everyone does, but for these participants, it's what they experience, and I think that is what to me stands out as so painful. It's just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
because they have to. It's like if they could, they wouldn't, but they
right.
have to, and so then now they have to go through all this pain to get to the other side of sexual release.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was really
Mhm.
there was also one other widow that you had oh, her husband had actually been oppressive and controlling.
Yeah.
Um, do you want to talk about that for that one was really interesting.
Yeah, so she described herself as not seeing herself as a sexual being because she hated
Right.
sex. She really did not like sex. And but she said that all of a sudden, I think within 2 months of her husband dying, she was walking around in the store and all of a sudden starting to notice male genitalia, especially during what do they call it? Sweatpants season, gray sweatpants season, where it's more. I didn't know anything about this before I became a widow, but it's all very much when it starts getting cold, guys start to wear gray sweatpants and they're like, oh, you can see, the outline. So she was saying, like, why am I looking at this guy in gray sweatpants? What is happening to me? So she was shocked. And she also became super attracted to a guy she thought was gross. So she's like, I don't even like him. And all of a sudden, I find myself wanting to have sex with this guy, that came over to the house. So it's shocking. And I think it goes to show, and I gave different examples there to show that people who had no sex drive or very little sex drive or even high sex drive, that widow's fire was very different
Mm-hmm.
than that. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? So it's like the one that had sex every once or
Once,
twice a month that she was cool
right.
with it. The other one that had no sex, she didn't see herself sexually. And there's another one who couldn't even wait the 6 weeks postpartum to have sex with her husband. And she was like, I've never experienced anything like it. So just to show this is shocking.
Different.
We don't
Yeah.
even know ourselves in this context, in this sample.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and so Darcy Harris is a researcher and a therapist. So she does a lot with non-death losses. She has this term that grief is a shattering of our assumptive world. So like she would apply that to, divorce or loss of a job or all kinds of things. And I
Mm-hmm.
do like her term, I use it sometimes, shadowing of our assumptive world. Um, and then I had just written a couple things under it, some quotes, but I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add to that idea, that theme, that version of grief.
Yeah, well, it shatters who you think you are sexually,
Yeah,
which is like I said,
yeah,
the sexuality is very central to who we are. So
yeah.
when you are left with not even knowing, I mean, you don't know who you are in so many different domains, but
Right.
sexual is one of them. It leaves people feeling unmoored. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
drifting and scared and like what is
Right.
happening to me, am I really the moral person I thought I was, all those
Yeah.
things. I feel like it's like I think of you have there's all these like strings of secondary loss, and if everyone you pull
Mm,
has such deep meaning to it, so when your assumptive world is shattered, it comes with a lot of despair and agony and hopelessness. This is the existential stuff.
mhm,
um, and sexuality is one of them because the isolation piece is, I think, what comes up to me.
mm,
It's like I used to be this beloved, person in a partnership, and I was loved and I knew I was loved. And now all of a sudden that's gone. That experience is gone. So then there's a lot of questions of worthiness and sexual desirability and things like that happen to be central to who we are. I think a lot of us are like, we try to be like, well, no, I mean, especially I'm a feminist. Like, I don't need a man's approval, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is that you do need intimate love. And if
mhm.
you've had it and you've lost it, then you have to figure out what to do with yourself and how you see yourself in the aftermath.
Yeah, that your assumptive world has been shattered, right?
Yeah.
In this intimate way. And one thing you had mentioned in the paper, which I don't think we talked about, is that that the intimacy of how that person, like everything else about grief, other people see or know, but this is one piece that people don't know or don't
hmm
obviously, right? It's intimate, but it is different than other parts of grief, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the day-to-day, the stuff people don't see and know, but the sexual piece, especially for people who are monogamous, or even those that are not, like there's still a small circle of people who would know or don't know. It's very hard to have so much grief about something that is, in essence, disenfranchised. Nobody knows about it. Nobody brings it up to you. Nobody talks about it. And I was very lucky when I began to experience this that I'm around a lot of social workers, social work therapists, professors, and mental health people who are like, that seems pretty normal to me, Liza. Like I think that seems normal. But, I remember mentioning it to a friend when I was like, I'm really struggling with this piece of the loss. And she was trying to help me just kind of like change perspective. She's like, well, sex isn't everything, right? And I was like, no. But inside of me was like, yes. In this moment,
Right.
it feels that way.
Right.
So, I'm trying to think back. Remind me the question again. You were saying about
Oh,
the
somewhere, and
loss
yeah,
piece.
but there you had mentioned somewhere, and I don't see the exact quote, but I thought it was really interesting how
Yeah.
this is one thing that other
That
people,
other people don't know. Yeah, right,
right,
right. And so they don't
right,
know why it matters so much. I
right,
think that's the other piece. I don't think that people understand, first of all, like you have all these nuances, the sexual things that they can't see that, but they also do not know that in your heart of hearts, and you don't know that until you lose it, what that means to you as well. You know what I mean?
mhm,
So these like, sweet text messages and flirtations and the pat on the butt and the things that people have, once that's stripped from you, people, number one, don't know that you lost all that's just
yeah,
like not on their radar at all. And I mean, I understand why.
yeah,
um and that with every reminder that that's not there, it just agonizing for a long time. And I think that, yeah, people not knowing that, it's hard. I mean, it's really hard. Not that you want people to come and say, "Hey, I know you're sexual," because I will tell
right,
you who does understand that. Exploitative people do understand
mhm,
that. I mean, the men that come out of the woodworks, or even the women that come out of
uh,
the woodwork, knowing, being like, "Hey, if you're lonely, let me know." Even
um,
in the funeral itself, I've heard that from widows, and they feel exploited by that because some people do understand you're going to miss that, and they want to use your weakness
right,
against you. And not to say that people can't have, they can have sex if they want, but I think there's something really gross to me about, I know your weakness is happening right now, so I'm going to come in and take advantage of that.
yeah.
Like I think there's an issue. So some people do know and they use it to their advantage, but the rest of everyone can't see, doesn't know, and it just makes people feel alone in these experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought that, I mean, it really is true. There's so many other things where people want to like make you dinner. I don't know, whatever. They're gonna,
Yeah.
how are you doing at work? But this is one thing people just don't, right. They can't really. Yeah. So I thought that was really insightful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And I know then I wrote themes of guilt and acceptance. I don't know. I'm trying to just kind of get into the frame of mind that someone had said we completed our vows and it's okay. And then one of the participants said, I thought this was so beautiful. I'm going to read it again. We completed our vows and it's okay, right? It's okay to go out and be a human again and to live and explore all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, yeah, is there anything you want to say about guilt, acceptance? I'm seeing a couple other I don't know. Do you want to jump in and say, I'm getting teary-eyed again. That one really hit me about
Yeah.
your vows and completing them and when it's okay, I think this ties in, right? Do I feel guilty? I want to have sex with other people. Do I have sex with other people?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there was one other quote, and I don't know that that is here, but that one also makes me teary-eyed. Is this woman that said she had massive widow's fire for months. And she goes, and then finally at month 8, I realized he's not coming back. And then I realized there's something I have to do with this.
Mhm.
And then that's when she gave herself permission to find a friend with benefits,
Yeah.
someone, she wasn't ready for a full relationship, but she wanted a friend because she was like, and I think we all have to realize we're stuck here
Yeah.
with these desires and these needs. What do we do with that? And I
Yeah.
think it's what's so strange is like to even experience sexual desire for anyone else or just like outside of your spouse is strange, or your life partner if you're not used to, if you're monogamous, right? And so
Yeah. Yeah.
um but then you have to people and this person talked herself through it by saying, you know what, like this is over, and I think
Mhm.
that's accepting that the marriage is over,
Yeah.
not just that the person is dead. That's another kind
Yeah.
of acceptance that we all have to deal with. And my own therapist told me that it was 14 months after Brent died. I was still wearing my wedding rings,
Mhm.
but at this point, I was starting to have these dreams that I was telling him, I have loved you for a year. You don't touch me. You don't talk to me. You ignore me. And I'm like heart sick and I can't continue living like this. Like I need a divorce. And there was one week I had dream after dream after dream, and I would wake up and my rings would be off in my bed. And I'd be like, oh my God, where are my rings? And looking for them. And so then I told my therapist that, I was doing internal family systems at that time.
Mhm. Yeah.
And she was like, I think there's a part of you that wants to acknowledge that you're no longer married. And she said, and to be honest, Liza, I feel like you accept that Brent's dead, but you don't accept your marriage is over. Like you've continued to be loyal to him. You've wore the rings, you do all this stuff, and you have all this anger. There's a part of you that has all this anger at being abandoned by him while you're being so loyal. And she's like, is there anything you can do to accept that you're no longer married? And I think that that really speaks to what
Yeah.
your vows are over. And so I remember taking my rings off and bawling my head off and getting on a dating app to really bring it home that he was dead and that I was now accepting my role as a single woman
Mhm.
um, in this world. And so it is very sad. It's very poignant. Like I think people think that when we make these decisions, like, oh, cool, we get to do. I
Mhm.
mean, the first time I ever went on a date, I cried the whole way to the date, and I'm an ugly crier. I was like red, swollen. I cried during the date, talking about my husband. I talked about my husband most of the time, and then. But the next day when I woke up, I no longer had that intense anger of abandonment,
Mhm.
So it was like sometimes you are forced your feelings force you, your needs force you to have to accept certain things so that you can,
Mhm.
move forward. And not to say that hasn't come back. I mean, it's come. I've definitely had moments of anger and abandonment afterwards, but
Mhm.
it was so intense. I couldn't sleep for a month because
Yeah.
I felt so abandoned by him at 14 months out. So
Mhm.
yeah, it is that we need support in like being able to move out of that commitment to a person and commitment back to ourselves, re-engage with our own lives and our own needs.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really interesting way of putting it, right? He's dead. And this idea that the marriage is over, right? That
Hmm.
those are two different things. Those are
Yes.
two different
Hmm.
ideas. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, okay, well, I want to be mindful of the time. Maybe I had also, let's see, we wonder if widow's fire could be a manifestation of yearning in the sexual domain. And I wrote, I totally agree. And then I put 3 exclamation points.
Yes. Yes. I agree too. I'm so glad that you see
Um,
that as well.
yeah. I
Mhm.
think it's important just to, to like we said, work with people, everyone individually. And this is an important thing to understand when we're working with young widows or certainly any widow that experiences this.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
um, so kind of wrapping up, just 2 quick points. I guess you had wrapped up with additional research should explore the impact of partner loss upon various pieces of a person's sense of self rather than viewing self-concept as a singular monolith. We talked about this. I love this. I think this
Mhm.
isn't, we've talked about this certainly for sexuality, but of course we really have to see people. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Oh, it's exactly what you said. There are various parts that change dramatically.
Yeah, yeah. And we work with everybody really individually.
Hmm.
Uh,
Including, I would say, the mental health. You know what I
mhm,
mean? Because you no longer are the person that was peaceful and calm. Now you're filled with panic attacks and flashbacks and stuff. And so just being like, who am I anymore? Like you don't no longer have the comfort of knowing you. Like your external world has changed and you've lost the comfort of you as well. And so I think those are all pieces that, as you're exploring the different parts of who people are, it's like there's grief in changing sexually, there's grief in changing mental health wise, there's grief in changing as now a single parent, and all those things. I think that absolutely.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. I always like to say, and you know this, there's our interpersonal, right, in the world, how we are, and our intrapersonal, right?
Mhm.
And it's really, with my clients, I always say we're going to break it down and parse it out, right? So this,
Yeah.
some of these are more your sexuality and your mental
Mhm.
health, and then of course our interpersonal in the world and some of those things. But I think that's a really important piece. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so you had one of the things you wrote is, and we're going to wrap up in a minute here. You wrote
Mhm.
further research should also explore the process of integration. This is my favorite word. My private practice is called the Center for Integrated Grief, and this is your show, but I just want to say I'm actually I'm teaching, and I'm going to be doing a lot about integrating grief, and I'm going to be doing some CEUs for all the clinicians out there. So you have to sign up for my CEUs, but integrating grief is my goal, my thing. And you wrote that. So I don't know. Do you want to add something about your version of integrating grief or what that means to you?
Yeah, I think integration is starting to feel like, I would say very specifically about Widow's Fire, because this is what we're talking about, is
Yeah.
that I understand about Widow's Fire and myself now, almost 4 years in, that when I do have these spikes of Widow's Fire, normally it's like 1 or 2 day thing. It's normally because I'm about to have a terrible grief experience.
Wow.
So it's almost like I now no longer feel like, oh my God, this terrible thing is happening. What do I do? What do I do? Like that at the beginning, I was just like flustered. Now it's like, oh, well, okay, there it is. I know that in a couple of days, I will probably have a hard time getting out of bed. You know what I'm saying? So it's always a precursor. It's a defense mechanism for me for when I'm about to have some terribly hard days. And so that to me is what I mean by integration around the sexuality. It's like now it's a part of me. It's a part of who I am. I'm no longer afraid of it. I know how to manage it. I know what it means to me now. And yeah, I think it's just not being afraid of these feelings. Like, yeah, it's sad, Like, I mean, who wouldn't wish to not have these things or to live with the repercussions of a death or to live with the loss? But accepting that's what it is. It's here to stay for as long as it's needed by my inner world. And how do I see what it means, what it needs to mean? Why does it need to be there? You know what I mean? What is its purpose? Instead of fighting it and be like, no, I'm not going to think about it. To me, that's what integration means.
Yeah.
Sexuality.
Yeah. Um, do other widows have that same experience of now when they feel the widow's fire for a day or two, it goes into this grief? Is that
I don't know. I'd love to do more research around that area of like what is a function of it now, because I think it's very
Mhm.
functional.
Yeah.
But what is its function now? I haven't asked that question. I just know that's for me, that's
Mhm.
been true. But when they think about it as like when it started at the beginning, they do see its function as protecting from trauma and reconnecting with life. They do see its function in that way. So um, the coming and going piece, it's only just my own, experience with it.
Really important. Wow. Thank you for sharing that piece. That is really, and I didn't know that, but I think that's a really important piece to add. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Well, so before we wrap up, is there anything else that I missed or you think is important to say about this topic?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that you missed. I mean, you were like one of the best note takers I've ever seen. I'm like, wow,
Mhm.
you were very in depth in your questions. But I would just add that this is, it is very intimate, and there's some like, haha, and we can laugh about it. But I think to never really forget that it's really rooted in tragedy, and so that it's about losing a person you love or a person that you were used to, and that these responses are just not anything we would ever ask for. This is happening to us. We have to learn to deal with it just like we deal with all the trauma that comes with it and all the pain. And we just, and so by writing this, what I hope people to see is to read this and say, oh, that sounds like me and I'm not alone. And that's what I hope people get from any of the research that I do, really, is to feel less alone.
Yeah. So I'm going to add to that, certainly less alone is really important. I
Hmm.
also feel that when we sometimes give words and structure, it can just help people. It can kind of guide,
Yeah.
even,
Hmm.
if someone watches this or, sees it's like, oh, okay, I do feel less alone. And this is like other people are going through this and I can cope. Maybe it helps them to cope.
Yeah. Well, cool. It gives them instruction
Yeah.
for, oh, other people do. Okay, so this is,
Yeah.
because I think there's like our initial reaction, which would be here, widow's fire, but then there's a reaction to the reaction that starts to become more problematic, the avoidance and all the things that can come with it. So if we could just say, look, it's just a part of it. I think that it could help dissipate the reactions to the reaction of
I
this
think that's a
piece. Yeah.
really wise way of putting it. Yeah. Well, I want to end by, so you have a website, the youngwidowhoodproject.org. I'm going to say that one more
Hmm.
time, the youngwidowhoodproject.org. And you have some social media, Facebook and Instagram. It's at the Widowed Researcher. I'll say that
Hmm.
again. Social media is at the Widowed Researcher. Anything else you want to say about your website or your social media before we wrap up?
So the website is we're creating a nonprofit of researchers to come together to do research on widowhood issues. So I see my goal there, my role and my new calling in life is to organize people to do more of this work and just kind of give more information for young widows and for practitioners. So that's what the Young Widowhood Project is all about. It's like we're just constantly churning out new research ideas and new studies to inform the widowed population, especially prematurely widowed. And then the widowed researcher, I'll put research on there. I'll talk about my personal experiences as well. And I think that the special lane here is that especially with social media, is that I mean, there are a lot of people who are doing great work, a lot of coaches on Instagram and on Facebook that are doing great work with widows. And what I appreciate about my own lane here is that this is coming from research perspective. So it's primary research that I'm doing, but I'm also looking at research that has been done already. And I'm trying to disseminate it so that I think there's a real power in understanding that this has been systematically studied
Yeah.
and people have looked at it and said, yeah, this is, and it's been peer reviewed and is scientifically sound. So I think that there is importance there that adds to the already good work that other people are doing.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. I think it's really, really important. And, we can always talk more. I think this is also important for clinicians, as we mentioned, how to do an
Mhm.
assessment and how clinicians can, understand this as well. So, yeah,
Mhm.
thank you so much. This is really amazing. This is a really important topic. So I really appreciate your time and you've been just wonderful and helpful. So,
Thank you
um,
so much, Carolyn.
thank you
Thank you
so
for making this a part of your podcast series and for seeing the importance of this issue. It really means personally a lot to me and professionally. So thank you so much. I appreciate thanatology themes for the work you're doing.
Thank you. All right. All
All
right.
right.
Thank you so much. And everybody watch for our next episode. We have lots of exciting people and things coming up, and I'm not sure what the next one will be, but keep watching and please subscribe. All right. Thank you. Take care.